Good morning, everybody. We're going to be looking at the Herald of the Sun build, our synergy, what our talents should be, what our rotation is for burst and sustained, and then our gear stat priorities, what we should be following for PvP. Taking a look at our talents, we're going to be breaking down the left-hand side first. We're going to be just going over which ones synergize, what can be played with first, and which ones actually matter. So we're going to be grabbing Greater Judgment. Greater Judgment is going to increase our damage of our Holy Power spending ability. So we're just trying to buff Judgment as much as possible. We'll be grabbing Blinding Light over Repentance because Blinding Light is instant cast, so it'll give you a better CC to set up on a kill versus Repentance being interrupted possibly. We're going to be taking Blessing of Sacrifice as well, mainly to get into Healing Hands. If you don't want Blessing of Sacrifice and you're casting Consecration through another synergistic move like Blade of Justice will cast a Consecration in this build, you could use that to try and heal up, but this is a great defensive talent to use on your teammate if they're the kill target to reduce the damage. Now, the only problem with this is that you're going to be taking damage as well, so you want to be careful with how you actually use that move. But we mainly want to grab Healing Hands to reduce the cooldown by 60% on Lay on Hands and increase our healing on Healing Hands on our Word of Glory. Over After Image, which doesn't really do that great of healing. We're going to be taking Blessing of Protection to protect our teammates. We're going to grab Unbound Freedom so we can move faster when we use Unbound Freedom, or Blessing of Freedom, I mean. Grab Divine Purpose so we get some more extra damage dealing. Taking Divine Toll into Divine Resonance. Now this is where a lot of synergy comes from your build, because your Divine Toll is going to cast judgments out on everything immediately and granting you extra holy power per judgment that was cast, and then every 5 seconds in a 15-second window it's going to cast another judgment, which is going to give you another holy power, and it's going to also give you stacks of that Greater Judgment so we can actually do a lot more damage using our holy power spending abilities. And take note, I didn't mention this, but this multiple applications of this may overlap, so you can have a lot of these going while spending your holy power abilities, and as long as you time it right, you can always get that 20% damage increase. Also, we're going to be taking of Dusk and Dawn into Seal of Order for this passive, which is going to increase our damage and healing of our next holy power spending ability. And then Blessing of Dusk increases your armor by 10%, your holy power generating abilities cooldown by 10% faster. That is more just a passive. That's not something you extremely need to pay attention to, but it's just an extra buff. So that's the left-hand side for the most part. We just grabbing a couple defensives, grabbing some synergy for our judgment, and any kind of team-oriented damage reductions if we can. Next, we're going to break down the right side. This is where the meat and potatoes really come in with this, so we can actually do our damage. Next, we're going to be breaking down our right side, which is pretty much the meat and potatoes of this actual build. So getting into it, obviously we're going to be taking Blade of Justice, Divine Storm, which isn't really going to be used too much in PvP. We're going to take Improved Blade of Justice to increase our charges by 1, so we'll have 2 total. We're going to be taking Art of War for our auto attacks to reset our cooldown of Blade of Justice into the critical strikes of your damaging abilities, single target holy power spending abilities, granting you 5% haste. A lot of people will take Consecrated Ground to give us a bigger consecration, which is coming from our Blade of Justice in this build. Personally, I don't see the need for that. I don't see the DPS increase or anything like that. So I like to grab that 5% haste. I love the days of when Paladins focused a lot on haste, because during their burst window, it was just move after move after move. So I try and get as much haste as possible. We're going to be taking Vanguard's Momentum over Sanctify. So we're grabbing Hammer of Wrath, has an extra charge on enemies below 20% and generates 1 additional holy power. That's going to work fantastically with our burst. We're grabbing Guided Prayer over Lights of Celerity. So when your health is brought below 25%, you instantly cast a free Word of Glory, 60% effectiveness, and cannot occur every 60 seconds. So it's just an extra defensive just in case you get low. We're also grabbing Swift Justice, which is going to reduce the cooldown of Judgment by 2 and Crusader Strike by 2 seconds. Grabbing Final Verdict, which is going to be our main holy power spending ability anytime we can. Final Jurisdiction is going to Final Verdict and Blade of Justice deal 10% increased damage, just a little passive buff. Now this can kind of get confusing. Some people may take Improved Judgment, which is going to give you 2 charges versus Boundless Judgment. And I know I said we want to throw out as many judgments as possible. But what we mainly want is our Judgment generating additional holy power and has a 50% chance to trigger Mastery High Lord's Judgment. Our Mastery is really good now, and I'll go over that when we get into the stats and gear and everything, but our Mastery actually matters nowadays. So casting this and having that many Judgments go out is very important. But with our rotation, it is actually not needed to have 2 Judgments, because you don't need to repeatedly spend Judgment after Judgment after Judgment, because you're going to have better holy power spending abilities, moves to actually cast. So we're going to use Judgment, Boundless Judgment in this case. Grabbing Heart of the Crusader, 1 talent in there. Grabbing High Lord's Wrath into Adjudication. Oh my god, I don't know why that was so hard for me to say. Adjudication into Blades of Light and Divine Arbiter. All these right here are just passive buffs to either Judgment or holy power spending abilities, so that's what we want. Going into Crusade, so we're going to be taking Crusade over Avenging Wrath, because this is going to give us a haste bonus and a damage bonus stack, which is going to grant us up to 30% of each, which just means we're going to be throwing out a ton of damage very fast. We're going to be grabbing Crusader Strikes, which is going to replace Crusader Strike, so that way it's not an extra move that we have to hit. It's going to be automatically with our auto attacks, which is going to synergize very well. We're going to get a holy power every 2 attacks. Templar Strikes is also actually pretty good, but with this build, what I've seen is that there's really, I would only take Templar Strikes if I had a lot of downtime. If I notice I don't have any buttons to press, that's where Templar Strikes would be really nice to have. But in this case, as far as the DPS standpoint, I don't need to, and I like the way Crusading Strike is played with this. So I don't, if you're a person who really likes a lot of buttons to press and you feel the need that you're finding yourself with a lot of downtime not pressing a button, grab Templar Strikes, it'll help you. But as far as DPS goes, it doesn't seem like there's really too much of a difference. We're going to grab Wake of Ashes, because that's where a lot of this synergy of this build is going to be coming from. One thing you need to know is that this is radiant damage, so it's going to be hitting like a truck. Also taking a Shield of Vengeance over Aegis Protection. We want Shield of Vengeance. It's going to be a great defensive 1-minute cooldown, and it's going to shield us for a lot and then explode upon once basically the enemy takes it all the way out. We're also going to be grabbing Final Reckoning over Execution Sentence. So I grabbed Final Reckoning just for it to be more on par with my burst window. You're going to get a lot more DPS out of this in your burst window, which is why you want to take this over Execution Sentence, mainly because they're going to be taking 30% increased damage from your single holy power abilities, which is our final verdict. So it's going to work extremely well in that case, where Execution Sentence is just going to be a dot over time to deal damage on another person. And then we're going to be taking Final Reckoning over that. Just, we don't want to take Execution Sentence just because it's going to be a dot on them, which isn't really needed. We want as much burst potential as possible in a short window. We're going to also extend that duration by 4 seconds. We're also going to be taking Seething Flames, which means Wake of Ashes is going to deal significantly reduced damage to secondary targets, but now cause you to lash out 2 extra times for X amount of radiant damage. That's perfect for our single target PvP build, so that's what we want. And then we're going to grab Burden to Ash. When Truth's Wake critically strikes, its duration is extended by 2 seconds, and your other damage over time effects deal 30% increased damage to targets affected by Truth's Wake. Now, the only one that I will say a lot of people will end up grabbing is Radiant Glory, which means basically whenever you use Wake of Ashes, you're going to pop Crusader for 10 seconds, and each holy power spent has a chance to activate Crusade for 5 seconds. It seems like it's like maybe a 25, maybe even 33% chance of it actually actuating, which is pretty often, and there's not a cap of how many times it can go off in a minute time frame, or even, it doesn't really have a cooldown basically. So if you keep casting holy power spending abilities, you can keep Crusade up for the most part, but it's not like once you have it up, you can just continuously go and keep it up the entire time as long as you spend holy power spending abilities. So in my opinion, I like to control my burst. I don't want my burst to come out of nowhere when I am not expecting it, or maybe I'm hoping for my burst to come up and it's not coming up. So I like to have full control over that. So I actually use that point into something else. If you wanted to take Radiant Glory for whatever reason, you could probably take out something down here, but I wouldn't really advise it because there's so much synergy that comes out from this last 3 tiers here. But if anything, maybe taking this Burning Crusade out and putting it here, and I'll go over Burning Crusade, which is basically going to give us more radiant damage by 5% for all of our abilities. So that's going to be a lot of our you know, Wake of Ashes and all that stuff. So that's going to be our talents and what we're running with. And next up, we're going to be looking at our heroic talents, what we're actually taking, and I will explain each piece. So looking at Gleaming Rays, we're going to be taking, so while Dawn of Light is active, your holy power spenders deal 5% additional damage or healing, so we definitely want that to try and get as much damage out as possible. Over Morning Star, which is going to give you that instant great burst for like the first second use and ability for that. But personally, as fights become longer, this is going to be way more helpful than Morning Star. But if you just want a better burst, then grab Morning Star, but I highly advise grabbing Gleaming Rays for those long fights. Eternal Flame, which is be changing our Word of Glory into this move, which is much better healing overall. Critical strike chance for Hammer of Wrath and Divine Storm is increased by 10%. We're also going to be grabbing Blessing of Anshi, which is going to increase our damage of our next Hammer of Wrath by 200%, and you're going to be able to use it regardless of their health. Over our Lingering Radiance, which if you're finding yourself dying or your teammates dying or something, grab Lingering Radiance. It's going to cast a heal and all that, Eternal Flame on them. But for damage purposes, we are taking Blessing of Anshi. And then we have Illumine. We're taking Illumine for Dawn of Light reduces the movement speed of enemies by 50% and increase the movement speed of allies by 20%. So this is just going to be a great synergy for how mobile we can actually be as paladins. Over movement speed increased by 5% while above 80% health. If you have played any kind of arenas, you're not always just sitting at 80% health, so it's kind of pointless to have that. Also, we're grabbing Sons of Avatar, which is going to be during Avenging Wrath. You're going to become linked to your Dawn of Light. So you're going to basically spawn a bunch of lights to people, and if they pass through them, that's why it's going to be important to be very mobile during this. Your lights are going to deal damage or healing to all your allies. So it's going to be very important to be moving while we have this burst up, which is why we want Crusading. That's why I like to control my burst specifically, because if I don't notice that I pop my wings, it's going to be kind of weird. PvP talents. I am taking Hollowed Ground for Consecration to clear the effect, so if I cast Blade of Justice on my target, that Consecration gets laid down. If I just get on that Consecration, it's going to remove all snares on me or allies. Taking Lawbringer as well, which is going to increase our damage of our Judgment as long as you continuously use Judgment. And then I'm taking an Aura of Reckoning, which is after 100 stacks, is going to increase our damage of our next weapon swing by 200%. I will say Paladins PvP talents aren't the greatest. I don't really like them that much. If you don't want to take Hollowed Ground, if you have a healer, grab Luminescence to increase that damage and healing for 6 seconds. And if you don't have a healer, grab Spreading the Word, which is going to affect your allies as well when you use these two moves, Blessing of Freedom or Blessing of Protection. Alright, so that is our talents. Now let's go over our gear and what our stat priority is looking like. Stat priority is going to be, most important, it's going to be Versatility, Mastery, Haste, and then Crit. Some people even say Haste equals Crit, meaning the same, or maybe even Crit over Haste. Me personally, I love the way a Haste Paladin build works. I want as much haste as possible to get out as many moves as possible. Your moves actually keep up with your haste. When you have so many haste, being able to attack faster, you're going to get a lot of things off reset. So I always go haste over crit. Versatility, reason why we're going to want to take that is because we're going to deal more damage to players. We're going to be able to heal ourselves more, and we're going to get a better damage reduction from players as well. So that way we don't get hit as hard. So that's highly important as a hybrid type class. We're going to be going into our mastery. So I said I was going to explain our mastery and why we want that 50% extra High Lord Judgment talent. It's going to increase our holy damage by 28%, but the important part is our judgment has a 31 or X amount of percent chance to blast a target with holy light, dealing X amount of holy damage. So increasing that up by 50% to get that High Lord's Judgment damage out is going to be very important. So that is our stat priority. Like I said, it's going to be versatility, mastery, haste, and then crit. So our burst rotation is going to look like throwing Judgment out into a Blade of Justice, popping our wings into Final Reckoning, and then Wake of Ashes. So following in that order is going to generate us 5 Holy Power immediately into a Final Verdict while we have our wings popped. It's going to increase all of our damage. That's the best route to take as quickly as possible, and then from there it's just generating Holy Power abilities, or Holy Power into our Holy Power abilities of Final Verdict. So it's going to be looking like this. Judgment, Blade of Justice, going to cast Wings, Wake of Ashes, Final Verdict because it has Divine Purpose, and then we're going to Hammer Wrath, and then rinse and repeat. And you want to generate as much as possible. But what you want to always try and do is cast your Hammer Wraths first anything, and then always spend your, and try not to go over your holy power spending abilities. Use Judgment off cooldown when possible, and then just continuously rotate through. It's going to go very fast a lot of the times, especially when you have Divine Purpose that comes out, which gives you a free holy power spending ability move, and it's going to throw a wrench a little bit because you're going to have a lot of things to be able to do. But the priority is always going to be a Judgment on cooldown into a Hammer Wrath, Final Verdict, and then when Wake of Ashes comes off cooldown, you're going to want to use Wake of Ashes right after to continuously spend that holy power. So you want to be able to keep Judgment up, which is coming from our Greater Judgment, which is why we want to spawn as many as possible. Now there's one move that I did not say that to pop during your burst, because this is very situational, and as you can see, I have generated so much holy power. I'm not waiting on any moves to come off cooldown, even without my burst. It's exactly like that. You're casting Hammer Wraths very frequently, you're casting Judgments very frequently, and then you have enough holy power to either heal yourself or even deal extra damage. But one move I did not say was Divine Toll. So this is going to be situational. So if you notice, the only time I actually use Divine Toll, not the only time, but during a burst window is when I use Divine Toll, is if I use Wake of Ashes and I want to generate as much holy power as possible, I'll use Wake of Ashes, use my 2 Final Verdicts, and then I'm going to use Divine Toll immediately to get those Judgment out, and then into Final Verdict. As you can see, if you didn't notice, even on attacking right there, right? When you're close to enemies, you're going to gain holy power per Judgment that's cast from your Divine Toll. So you're going to have a lot of holy power, and you want to maximize the amount of Final Verdicts you can use, so you want to be able to use all that holy power. So you either heal yourself or use your Final Verdicts, depending on the situation. But that's going to be our burst. So Judgment, Blade of Justice, into Wings, Final Verdict, or Final Reckoning, Wake of Ashes, you have 5 holy power guaranteed right there, into Final Verdict, Hammer Wrath, use Judgment off cooldown, Final Verdict, and rinse and repeat with that. But you definitely want to use Wrath over Judgment when possible, because it's going to deal a lot more damage in a burst window. But you want to make sure also that you're using Judgment off cooldown to ensure that you're getting those Greater Judgment stacks on your enemy. And that is our synergy. That is everything. Very simple and easy rotation to go with. If you notice, I was getting procs of Blade of Justice. Those aren't mandatory to actually cast. Like I said, you always want to get that Hammer Wrath off, and you want to get those Judgments off over Blade of Justice. Blade of Justice is going to be that filler to gain holy power, so that way you can actually get off your Final Verdicts. So it's going to take a lot of timing on that. You're going to end up generating a lot of holy power, and you're going to not know what to... The greatest thing about this is that you're not going to be holy power starved at all. So this build is really good. It's fantastic on burst. And like I said, if you guys want to go into Radiant Glory, so you can have less control about your burst and have a better sustained damage, that is the trade-off, then by all means go ahead and try it out. Let me know how it goes in the comments if that's what you decide to do, or maybe that's what you're playing with. If this guide helped you, please like the video, please the YouTube gods and the algorithm, and like always, have a good one.